And looking in this direction, I want to thank whoever called in the weather so that I'm not distracted behind you. I want you to picture a skinny white kid on the back of a flatbed pickup truck driving through the ghettos of Philadelphia. You see, it's the 70s, and I'm with my dad, and we're delivering beer. We're delivering beer in the ghettos of Philadelphia. And the reality is my dad always had 3 jobs. And this is one of the 3 jobs. And it would be, you know, 6, 7 o'clock at night, and I'd be standing at the door with a case of beer, and he'd be banging on the door, and he'd scream, "Beer man!" And I don't know how they do it in the ghettos today, but in those days, they didn't answer the door. They would scream down from the window, and they'd scream, "I ordered that beer at 7 o'clock in the morning, where have you been?" And my dad would scream up, "Do you want it or not?" And he looked at me, he always says this, he goes, "They always want it." So I guess if you're willing to deliver beer in the ghettos of Philadelphia, customer service really doesn't matter. Today I live in Eden Prairie with 3 adult children, and we're empty nesters, and we actually answer the door, whether it's the pizza being delivered or UPS. And it wasn't that long ago the Girl Scouts came, and I bought like 4 boxes of those Thin Mint cookies, you know? And I could have sworn when she left, she said, "They always want it." But I learned a lot from my father. I learned this work ethic that he instilled in me. And that work ethic led to me also adding working smart. And it was through those 2 things and a lot of blessings that I had a lot of success. CEO of Lawson Software, took them public in 2001. Was CEO of a company called XRS, and was a turnaround. We ended up selling it, very successful. So I've had a lot of secular success. I'm also a convicted felon. And in the midst of a skyrocketing career, I ended up going to jail. So what do you think my definition of success is? And the reality is I get asked a lot about success because of the nature of what I had. And for people in Minnesota, they ask me about success because they've seen me at Lawson or they've seen me at XRS. But the people in Philadelphia ask me about success, and in my neighborhood, it was a tough neighborhood. I mean, we had some people in our Philly neighborhood that were going to Penn State. Most were going to the state pen. You know, our school colors were orange. And because of it, I have 2 things about success that I know. I'll share them both with you right now after thinking about this question for a while. One is, I've never met anybody successful at everything they do. I've met a lot of successful men and women in the business community, but maybe their golf game stinks. Or maybe they're really struggling with something going on at home. And the other thing about success that I know, similar to a famous line from Clint Eastwood in the movie Unforgiven, where he's just shot Gene Hackman, and Gene Hackman's on the ground, and he's getting ready to shoot him again, and Gene Hackman looks up and goes, "I don't deserve to die." And Clint Eastwood looks down and goes, "Deserve's got nothing to do with it." And the reality for me with success is, deserve's got nothing to do with it. Meaning, there is no entitlement. There's no reality that just because you work hard that you are going to be successful. I mean, I pretty much guarantee if you don't work hard, you won't be successful. But there's no guarantee. And it forced me to ask a different question than success, because success is really different for everybody. My real question and my change of paradigm was, how do you want to be defined? How do you want to be defined? And if you want to take a couple things out of this speech this morning, it's this. I want you to realize that you can accomplish more while achieving balance in life. You can accomplish more while achieving balance, and when you do, you have the privilege of writing the rest of your story. You have the privilege of writing the rest of your story. Is everybody familiar with a famous poem called The Dash? The Dash, it's sometimes referred to as the funeral poem. And it's the idea that you have on your tombstone, you have a birth date and you have an end date, and the whole poem is about the dashes in between those 2 things. And the dashes, to me, represent living life to the fullest. Living life to the fullest, and in it is how you have to be, or how do you want to be defined. When I say the word success, who comes to mind? Think of somebody. Think of somebody. Got it? When I say the words, or when I ask you to think of somebody that you actually respect, think of somebody. Same person? Same person? Some of you. Some of you. Find out more often than not they're two different people. And I'm not sure if that falls in, but for me, they were the same person. They were my dad. And I respected my dad, and I appreciated and valued our time together. I admired him, and I loved him. And that's what makes the next part of the story so authentic and so hard. January 3rd, 1998, my dad and mom are in the Twin Cities for the holidays. And my dad and I went out to a local hunt club. And we went down, and afterwards we went to a bar, and we stayed at the bar way too long. I was driving home drunk. I missed the turn, went down a hill, and I hit a train at 60 miles an hour. And I don't remember much, but I remember waking up in Hennepin County Trauma Center, and I'm in a lot of pain. And I got a lot of people working on me, and I look up, and I can see my mom, and I can see my wife, and I can see something terribly was wrong. And my mom leaned down to me, and she said, "Your dad didn't make it." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Your dad didn't make it." And I'm going to tell you, you don't know what pain is until you hear something like that. You don't know where you go until you accept the fact that you're just responsible for a person you respected, admired, and loved. I went to a place that I can only describe as hell, because I don't know what's worse than that. And I was in a really bad spot. And for the next 3 days, I was going to go through a lot of operations. And I remember being in my hospital room, and there was a clock at the end of the bed, and it was a white clock with the black numbers and the black letters going around it. And there was a red second hand. And I thought, I closed my eyes, and I went to a place where I was tormented. And I thought hours would go by. And maybe when I woke up, 5 or 6 minutes went by. And that's where I was, in pain, for 3 days. My wife looked at me and she said, "I looked in your eyes and you were gone and you weren't coming back." And different priests and different pastors are coming in, and I'm kicking them out of my room, and I'm saying, "Get out, don't you understand? I'm responsible for my dad's death." And then one day, nobody's in the room, nobody. And a gentleman comes up to me and he starts using words like forgiveness and sinner. And I said, "I feel like I'm at the top of the sinner list." And he said, "You say a prayer with me and you receive forgiveness." I said a prayer about admitting that I was a sinner and asking God into my life. And I asked God into my life right then. And it was like a powerful moment for me. It was like the Holy Spirit just came and connected to my soul. And then he left. And my wife walked in. I don't know how much time passed. She walked in. She goes, "I saw a completely different person." And I looked at her and said, "I just accepted God into my life." Out of nowhere. My life started to change dramatically, but the reality was I was still in pain. But all of a sudden I could see, I could feel, I could touch again. It was like I was coming out of the clouds. And then time went by. I get out of the hospital, and I'm sitting in my driveway, and I'm in a wheelchair. I was in a wheelchair for a few months. And I'm reading a letter from the state, and it says, "We're prosecuting you for criminal vehicular homicide. 4-year prison sentence. 4-year prison sentence." And I'm like, what does this mean to me now? What does this mean to me now? So my wife and I would pack up the wheelchair, we'd go around, and we saw a bunch of lawyers. And I met different lawyers, and each time they said the exact same thing. They said, "Jay, if we do everything right, if all the stars line up, you won't have to do 4 years in prison. You'll only have to do 2 years in jail." And my answer was the same each time. What's plan B? Because that ruins my life. And this is how the self-talk starts to happen, which is very dangerous for all of us. I said, if I go to jail for prison for 2 years, I'll lose my job, I'll lose my job, I'll lose my house, I'll lose my house, I'll lose my wife. My wife was an asset. This is one of those vows, better or worse times, that she was going to stand by me. But I could talk myself and make a bad situation even worse. I could just, and so I was in a trial for 6 months. And in that trial, by the way, I'm in this trial and I'm guilty. This is no spinning this that, I'm guilty. And so I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you're in a nightmare and you close your eyes at night, you're thinking about it. And when you open your eyes in the morning, you're thinking about it. And every day. But I have a new faith that I'm going to help me get through this, get through this process. It was January that year, and Lawson Software at the time, I had some title of EVP, and my division had done really well. And we had a big meeting in New Orleans, and I missed the first day. I missed the first night. I missed most of the second day, and I get there for the second night. And this is the first time most of the people from Lawson are really seeing me, and I'm coming into an event with about 300 or 400 people, and I'm either using crutches or on a cane, but it looks like I'm healing. And I went there, and my division, because I had had a bunch of great men and women working for me, had won most of the awards. And I walk up to the microphone, and I receive a standing ovation. One of the highlights of my business career. And when I got up to the microphone, what I felt like saying was, yesterday, I was sentenced to 6 months in jail, 10 years probation. Standing ovation, going to jail. What kind of roller coaster ride are you on? Standing ovation, going to jail. Life's going to take you on a roller coaster ride. It might not be as high as this or as low as this, but you're on a ride. And the only question is the choices that you're going to make that will define who you are based upon that ride. For me, it was about now, how am I managing this issue of going to jail? I go to jail. It's a crazy place. It's wacky, and I meet my roommate. First off, when you're in jail, guys will ask, where you're from, and the first 3 or 4 guys, I'm like, I'm from Eden Prairie, and I'm like, why am I telling you I'm from Eden Prairie? And I said, if I see any of you guys in Eden Prairie, I'm actually calling the cops. But what they meant is what prison system you're from and what are you in for, and they could always connect the time, what you're for. My roommate looked like a black militant. Rag on his head, the gold rim plant, looked like Louis Farrakhan. And I met him, and he goes through what he's done, dealing drugs, robbery, double homicide, boom, boom, boom. He goes through all this process. And it turns out his name was Andrew. And Andrew had become a fellow believer somewhere in the prison system. He was a real deal, and Andrew helped me out dramatically through this process. I mean, he was a huge asset for me just getting through the craziness. And I would go to Andrew every night. I'd say, Andrew, before we go to bed tonight, we're going to pray. And we used to pray together. And I'd say, let's go, Andrew, before we go to bed, I want to go into the Old Testament. I want to go back into those 10 commandments. You know that one about thou shalt not kill? I want to make sure you have that out of your system. And I'm getting through this process, and I got to get rides to and from work, and you can imagine how arduous it is. And after a certain amount of time, I actually get home released, and I'm wearing an ankle bracelet, but it was better. I'm home. I'm seeing my kids. And I get out of that process, and Lawson is really picking up speed again. And we're one of the last, this is in the 2000 now, we're one of the last large enterprise software companies that hadn't gone public. And Bill Lawson and Richard Lawson, who were great to me through this process, are really working with me, and we're trying to put together, and Bill and Richard are trying to take the company public, and they're starting to meet with investment bankers. And Bill would go to meet these investment bankers, and we'd have a whole slide deck, and he would do the first presentation, and then he would hand the presentation over to me. And at that point, I would go through the whole slide deck, and every time the investment bankers would say, hey, great job, Jay, wrong job title. I think I was like EVP or something. And Bill would just go through this process, and so much so that we eventually moved down into the Lawson building in St. Paul, put a big building up. Lawson was all over the outside of it. And in 2000, they made me president of Lawson. And I'm president for 2 days. And my director of HR comes up to me and goes, Jay, do you realize this is a no smoking building? I go, yeah, for sure. So he goes, do you realize that Bill Lawson is smoking? And you realize that you got to go down and tell him he's not allowed to smoke. I said, this president job sucks. I get out and see Bill, and obviously, he's in the middle of the floor, and I can smell the smoke before I even get to the room, and he's got machines in there trying to gobble the smoke up, and I said, Bill, I sit down, and I said, Bill, do you realize this is a no-smoking building? I can hardly see him through the smoke. And he looks at me, he had glasses, he always looked over, and he goes, Jay, it doesn't say no smoking software on the outside of the building. I go, it doesn't say Coughlan software on the outside of the building either. Go ahead, keep smoking, Bill. And lost it, and then things really pick up, and the fiscal responsibility goes up dramatically, the accountability goes up. We have to change the strategy because what was working as a private company was not going to work as a public company. I had a really good team of people that were coming up with me, but I had to go outside and get some new people, like in the area of finance. Had to change the board. I was no longer influencing just employees and customers and influencing investors, and we had to drive results to a whole new level. So much so that we got the whole organization ready to go in 2001. We're going to go public in September 2001, and what happens? 9/11. Lehman Brothers is one of our co-leads. Their building goes down. A couple of guys we were dealing with were in it. We get delayed. So bank, JP Morgan and Lehman Brothers comes back to me right before Thanksgiving. They say, if you and your CFO get on the plane, you can start taking this thing out. We go do the road show. December 7, 2001, we take loss in public. Raised $200 million, had a $1.4 billion market cap. 5th largest IPO in Minnesota history. January 3rd, 1998, I was in an accident. I was in Hennepin County Trauma Center. Went through a trial, went to jail, got out, got my career back. December 7th, 2001. In less time than it takes you to go to college, I went from convict to CEO. That's a story of perseverance. That's a story of hope. That's a story of faith. But I'll tell you, for me, it was about the choices that I made. The choices, I had clarity through that whole process. I mean, when I finally came out of the fog, I had clarity. I knew where I was going. I knew the directions I was going. I had accountability, which motivated me. Not only accountability to Richard and Bill Lawson to get done what needed to get done, I had accountability to not be defined by my worst moment. To not be defined by my worst moment. I certainly was able to adapt. I was adapting not only because I grew up in the technology industry, which you always had to do, but I adapted not only to the process of going through jail, but the process of going through a public process. The public process, as all of you know, is an arduous process, but how hard do you think it was for me to adapt when less than 2 or 3 years before I was going through a trial? And I was trying to figure out how to hold my life together going to jail. So I had learned how to adapt. I had confidence because I knew where the truth was. And that confidence gave me credibility, and I realized that life was about a marathon, not a sprint, and I had balance. Those are the choices that I made. They are choices that allowed me to not be a victim of my circumstances, to not be defined by my worst moment, but to redefine who I wanted to be. Those are the choices that are available to you. They're available to you all. There's clarity, there's accountability, there's adaptability, there's confidence, and there's balance. There are 5 bold choices that I have a book coming out in January about to allow you to rise above your circumstances and redefine your life. Life, to me, gives all of us challenges and opportunities. And in those challenges and opportunities, they demand some kind of response from all of us. Unfortunately, what I find is that most of us, not most of us, maybe not all of you, maybe some of you, but people that work with you, for you, they live by default. They live by default. And what that means is they let those opportunities and challenges pass either by just ignoring them, delaying them, procrastinating, running away from them. And therefore they live in a world where they're stuck. They become victims of their circumstances. And this is what stuck sounds like. Jay, I'm not where I want to be in my career. Jay, is this all there is to life? Jay, how come I'm so tired? How come I'm so worn out? And my favorite, Jay, I had all these goals and aspirations, and then I had kids. Like the kids are the problem. To me, it's about rising above your circumstances and having the privilege of redefining your life. For all of you that are executives, I've been a CEO of public companies for over 12 years. I coach CEOs today. And I always will say to people, what do the successful CEOs, men and women, have that you don't have? And the answer I get when I speak to a lot of groups are things like title, power, money. And I go, those have to be earned, at least in most cases. Those things have to be earned. What I found that they have, that you have, or you're looking for, or even the people that you're working for are looking for, they always have clarity. They know what they want. They're focused. They're focused. They're always motivated. And to me, they're motivated because they have accountability. It might be to investors, it might be to a board, it might be to their family. They've all learned how to adapt, whether they came up through the ranks as in sales and marketing or finance or operations. They certainly had to adapt to the other disciplines around them. And then any organization all of you are running, you know you have to adapt to whatever environment you're in. They all have confidence, which gives them credibility. And they've all learned somewhere along the line that this is a marathon called life, not a sprint. And if you're going to make it, you're going to have to figure those out. Those are the things that I end up talking to people about. Those are choices. They're choices that are available to all of you. I'll leave you with this. About 4 years ago, I actually did this presentation to a group, and afterwards I was heading down to Red Wing with a friend of mine, and he jumped in the truck with me. And we're driving down, and down on 61, we're going down and it's raining like a day like today, except for it was sleeting. And what I didn't realize is that it was sleeting and the road was becoming ice. And I'm coming down this big hill and there's a 400-yard overpass and it is a sheet of ice. And my car's coming down like this, and there's a car here, and all of a sudden the truck I'm in, the back end starts to go a little bit this way. And I'm like, hey, no, I live in Minnesota now, I got this, we're just spinning a little bit. And then it spins back this way, and I went, ooh, that went a little further than I liked, you know. And then it came back this way, and my car, and I got the wheel like this, and it's spinning like this way, 60 miles an hour, out of control. And I look over at my friend, and he is frantically trying to put on his seatbelt. And I looked, and I think the thought that came into my head is, man, as soon as we hit something dry, it's going to be, boom, the truck's flipping. All the glass is out, and the truck's on its side. When I wake up, I'm like, Lord, I'm in the mud again. I'm in the mud again, you know, my face is down and we're in the dirt. And obviously my friend didn't get a seatbelt on, but because he's on top of me, and now we got to figure out how to do some kind of Cirque du Soleil thing and get out of the truck and push the door open. And so we're hurt. And my chiropractor's like, you know, you're going to be back with me for another year coal mine for me. And we get out of the truck. So the two things I want to leave you with before I open up for question is, one, if I offer to give you a ride home from here, you should respectfully decline. And two, how much time do you think you have to start defining who you want to be? My friend couldn't even get a seatbelt on. He couldn't even get a seatbelt on. Think of the dash. Think of the dash, because you have the choices, and those choices that you make are going to be the things that define who you are. So with that said, I want to thank you for having me here today, and I'll open up for questions. Thank you.
You mentioned with Lawson that I was just curious, it's pretty nice that they stood behind you. It's pretty nice that Lawson stood behind you through this whole thing. It appears from that. Yeah. Many other companies might have just kind of jumped to the side. Can you just touch on that a little bit?
Bill and Richard Lawson definitely stood by me. I think I was also, you know, coming up through the ranks. They knew me real well. I think if I had went away for any longer than 6 months, they would have been able to. That was sort of the magic line. From that perspective, they were great. I mean, I don't know how I could have done it. The hard part for me was we were quickly then going into the public process. And that transition, when you go public, you know, for those of you who know, I mean, the amount of information that's out there on your company and you is big. And so you can imagine as being the CEO that my paragraph or whatever it was, page or whatever it was, it started with, you know, convicted felon. You know, not something you might want to invest in based on that, right? So I really had to get out in front of that story. And it's really led me to where I am today, is because I had to start telling that story so that, you know, Richard and Bill would give me this opportunity, and I couldn't let that be a barrier. So I can't tell you how many people told me, you can't do it. There's no way you can do that. You can't do it. And I never listened to that. And so for me, I got a very small rear view mirror, and I got a big windshield. And for me, I was like, I didn't even hear that. And that's one of the choices I made to say, how am I going forward? And I think Bill and Richard respected that. And certainly I can't say enough good things about them. So.
Jay, what are the advantages and disadvantages of going public?
Wow.
Well, I don't know. In a nutshell, I mean,
XRS, the company, the second company I was with, was you know, say $20 million. We turned it around. We were public and we shouldn't have been. So I think I got a good view of this. And by the way, the public markets have changed pretty dramatically. I mean, there's not as many public companies here in Minnesota or even in the nation that there once was. I think being public, CEO of public company 12 years, if you don't need the capital that comes with that, I would say don't go public. Because the additional amount of scrutiny and stuff that comes your way isn't worth it. There's an immense amount of wasted effort. There's an immense amount of additional regulations that if you're not doing it for some really strong reason of building capital, and there's so much capital available today in the private market, and because of that, you see that Minnesota struggles in this area, and so does the country. So I'll give you a quick example. When I came to this other company called XRS, we were a $20 million company, public. We weren't even in the top 100. Quickly grew it to 50 million, and we became 97. And then because of the way revenue was shifting, a long story, I stayed at 50 because one revenue line was going up, the other one was going down. So I stayed for 2 years, about 50 million. I went from 97 to 79, I think. Today, the top 100 companies, when I just looked at this the other day, there's 86 of them. And you get up past 65, you're below 50 million. And if you're below 50 million, I would struggle whether you should be public or not. And Minnesota has an issue associated with, there's 20 really strong top 20 public companies here. And I think it masks an issue that we have as an area, that's a gap. That's a big gap. And what I don't understand is how come we're not backfilling that? Because the new Medtronics of the world all come from that world. And to me, it's a gaping hole for some reason. And I think it's an issue for us as a business community. Does that answer your question?
It does, and well, I'll talk to you afterwards too, I'm curious.
Jay,
I'm sorry.
how did this, you said you had, I can't remember, it was 2 or 3 adult children?
3.
3. And what was their journey like while you were going through having to go to jail and the trial and all of that, and they lost their grandfather too?
My sons, good question. My sons were really young. They were 1 and 3. And when I was in jail, my wife could come to Lawson, and I got let out to go to work, and there was this dumpy gym in the basement that she'd 2 or 3 times a week come to lunch, and I could get to see my boys, because no way I was letting them see me in that orange jumpsuit. And but my daughter couldn't, because she was like 10. And there's consequences for all of our behavior. And I got forgiveness from God, but I did not get forgiveness from the state. By the way, rightfully so. Rightfully so. So one of the things I did was I was not going to see my daughter for a long time, and I bought this giant teddy bear. And I practiced this speech longer than I practiced any speech in my life. Was this is going to have to replace your daddy for a little while, and I gave it to her. You fast forward, my daughter, I'm so proud of. She's graduated Georgetown Medical School. She's at the University of Minnesota in general surgery, and still has that teddy bear. So it was tough. It was a tough environment.
Jay, you work in leadership development now. I worked kind of through the process of going from a private company to a public company. And one of the things that happened is all of the regulation and all the changes require a whole bunch of other slots that you didn't have before. And filling those slots with people who had real leadership skills was difficult. You get people who are, I always divided it in half, those who are looking at the next rung and those who are looking at our business model and trying to figure out what we needed to do to be successful. And they were almost never the same people. In your view of society now, education, what they're producing, the general business experience, the landscape is changing really fast. Is there going to be, or is there currently, a drought of what I call real leaders? Not people who can manage a company, but people who have real respectable leadership skills, like you talked about when you asked the question, is the same person that you respect is the person you thought was a successful leader?
I would say the millennials get a bad rap. I'll give you two answers. One, recently I was at West Point for a leadership summit talking, and I was totally humbled by the men and women cadets that were there. For the last 12 years, if you went to West Point, you knew you were signing up for war. And they lose people every year. And I watched the best and brightest of this country and met a lot of them. And so for me, from a leadership perspective, I was humbled that there are still a lot of great young men and women in this country. From another perspective, I coach a lot of CEOs that pay me, and then I coach 3 millennials that don't pay me. I can only do with so many, right? But I did it for the reason I wanted to see how different it was. And there are 3 enterprise, they got their, I would call them entrepreneurs that are running businesses. And what I found was that they use technology differently. You know, like I'm constantly texting them, call me, right? You know, it's like dealing with my kids, you know, call me. And then finally they pick the phone up and I go, yeah, you can actually talk on this device. But I was surprised to see that the issues are still the same. And I think they struggle with the issues the way I probably struggled with the issues when I was in my 30s as well. And they're just learning. And what I'm optimistic about is there's a lot of them willing to spend the extra time. They're working hard, and they're really challenged by it, and they're open to learning. That's what I've seen against the backdrop of the message you get about millennials, right? So I still see a lot of hope in it, but I don't know percentage-wise if that's more or less than when we were going through it or not. But I do see enough of it that I'm hopeful.
Jay, thanks very much.